everybody, and welcome again to the course of U.S. history. I am Mr. Samuelson. Last time we met, we talked about the first Americans. It was the first part of this lesson. And in that lesson, we focused on the arrival of Native Americans and their first settlement. Today, we are going to be looking at part 2 of that lesson as we examine the culture groups that are formed by Native Americans. Now, these first Americans arrived thousands of years ago, and they had thousands of years to spread out, and they did, all across North America and throughout South America as well. Now, by about 2,000 years ago, there are 2 large and significant culture groups in North America. We see them circled on the map here and here. Those 2 large North American culture groups are called the Mound Builders and the Anasazi. And those are going to be who we are looking at throughout today's lesson. Let's start with the Mound Builders. Well, the Mound Builders settled in the Midwest and Southeast United States about 2,700 years ago. These mound builders were called mound builders because they were builders of mounds. Complicated stuff here. These mounds were largely built out of dirt and clay, and sometimes they resembled pyramids, and other times they resembled, as this one does, animals. This would be a serpent mound, and it is an image, you can see it a little more clear down here, of a serpent, a snake, devouring an egg. This is just one clear example of the type of artistic mounds that were created by these mound building cultures. Now, the question did arise, why were they building mounds? And for years, people thought that they were burial sites, that they were just like the Egyptian pyramids. And this was sustained by the fact that there were bodies found buried in a ceremonial fashion under some of these mounds. But later archaeologists came to believe that there was a bigger purpose for these mounds, that they were also sites for religious worship, that these are gathering places for the mound building cultures so that they could practice their religion. Now, the very first of these mound building cultures is the Adena. The Adena were the first ones to get into this whole mound building craze, and their mounds are correspondingly much smaller. They're the first to do it. They don't have the large scale of some of the later mounds. Now, these Adena are getting started in the Ohio Valley about 2,700 years ago to 1,500 years ago. I've got a map over here to show the area we're talking about. Here we have the Mississippi River and an important fork in that Mississippi River here. If you follow it up to the right, we're actually now talking about the Ohio River, and the area in blue is where the Adena culture were, in southern Ohio and Kentucky and Pennsylvania predominantly. So that is where the Adena were located. Now, the Adena themselves, they were hunter-gatherers, and they were fishermen. They didn't rely a whole lot on farming. They got most of their food from the Ohio River and the tributaries off of that river. And then they also, of course, hunted wild game. This was how the Adena survived, and they didn't need to farm in order to make a living. Now, our next culture is the Hopewell. The Hopewell arrived after the Adena, and they're significantly larger. They have a much wider range, going farther west to the upper Mississippi River Valley and along Lake Michigan, as well as covering the old Adena stomping grounds in the Ohio River Valley. And they also had trade and cultural connections down into the south. Now, they are going to be a larger population. They are going to be farmers. Anytime you have a farming community, your populations in general are going to be larger. They're going to be wealthier. They're going to be more capable of doing large projects, such as building larger mounds. So the mounds of the Hopewell were significantly larger than those of the Adena. Now, nobody quite knows why the Adena or the Hopewell disappeared. It's not historically documented, and the Adena and Hopewell cultures did not write, so they didn't leave that behind. So we don't know exactly how they vanished, but we do know that shortly afterward, we have the rise of the third and final mound building culture, the Mississippians. These Mississippians are going to arise around 800 CE, And they're going to be very advanced compared to most other Native American groups, especially North American Native American groups that you will have heard about or studied. Now, they're going to cover a very large geographic area. They cover the old Adena lands, the old Hopewell lands, as well as the southern Mississippi River Valley and areas of the American Southeast. Now, they're also going to be a trading empire, and they're going to have connections, trade connections with others. In particular, you're going to find that they have trade connections with some great Native American empires in the American Southeast. So they are, sorry, not the American Southeast, in Central America and Mexico. And we see trade goods from these other cultures appearing within Mississippian archaeological record. Now, the Mississippians are perhaps best known for their capital city. Cahokia was a city of more than 40,000. This is a very large city for 1500 AD. It would put it on the scale of the larger European settlements. There were only a few European cities in 1500 that were much more than 50,000 people. So Cahokia was a big city. And most of the European explorers who will come upon the ruins of Cahokia will immediately recognize that this was a massive settlement. So the Mississippians are advanced, high population, big cities. Now let's look at our second culture, the Anasazi. This is the other main culture group within what is now geographically the modern United States. And the Anasazi were around for a while, about 900 years, from 450 to 1350 CE. Now, the Anasazi live in the southwest of America, predominantly in Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. Here we can zoom in on this area, highlighting where the Anasazi live, and it was right around the corner of where those four states meet, otherwise known as the Four Corners. So this is the heartland of Anasazi culture. They're going to build their cities into the sides of cliffs. They have really actually very cool sites. This is Mesa Verde, one of those Anasazi cities. And because they had so many of these cities carved into the sides of cliffs, their culture is sometimes just referred to as the cliff-dwelling culture. Now, these cliff dwellers, these Anasazi, lived in towns which were named pueblos. Pueblos is a Spanish term, and it's called this because it was Spanish explorers who discovered them and named them and made them popular to the rest of the world. Now, these pueblos were built of stone and clay brick and wood, and they were very modern in their architectural sense. You look around the world and you didn't see architecture that was much more advanced than what you were seeing within these Anasazi villages. Now, the Anasazi themselves, they would climb down or up those cliffs every day, and they would farm their fields up above those cliffs or down below those cliffs. And the reason why they did that is their cliff-dwelling homes would then be a natural defense against invaders. So people attack, they could flee the fields, go to these cliff homes, which were very well defended, and they could protect themselves very well. So you're not going to see a lot of successful invasion of a lot of these territories. So why do they go into decline? Well, the leading theory on the decline of the Anasazi has to do with poor farming techniques. It's believed that they deforested too much of the land around their cities. And as they deforested this land, as you had fewer and fewer trees, the trees wouldn't hold that topsoil in place anymore. And the winds could pick up and would really blow at that topsoil and eventually carrying it away. And as that topsoil blows away, you're left with this very nutrient-poor soil left behind that doesn't sustain farming very well. So you'd have to travel farther and farther from these cities to actually have successful farming, and eventually that became unsustainable, and the Anasazi cities fell into decline. Next time, we're going to be looking at Native American cultures that existed around 1500 CE, or around the time of European arrival. So we're going to get a glimpse of what Native American society looked like as Columbus and the Spanish and the English and the French explorers are very first experiencing these cultures. So that's next time. Thank you very much for joining us today, and farewell.